Okay, good afternoon. Today we're going to learn about value, which is, in terms of art, talking about like the lightness or darkness of things. A lot of times in a drawing class, we associate the idea with value with something we call shading, which we learn to do with a pencil. So value refers to changes in tone from dark to light. Using a graphite pencil, we will work from the white of the sheet of paper that we work with to the darkest black or gray that your pencil can go, and all of the grays in between. You can train your eye to see thousands of shifts or changes in value, but it does take practice. And that's part of learning how to draw things using a pencil, is you're learning to see those tiny changes in value to add the tiny shadows to your object to make it look three-dimensional. Using a pencil, we will focus on working between 10 and 12 values typically when we talk about a drawing with a full range of value. Artists use value to create three-dimensional effects on a two-dimensional surface. Obviously, so far in this class, we've been focusing on contour line drawing. Just because we're switching to value doesn't mean the idea of contour line drawing goes away. We will continue to contour line draw as the very beginning step of every single drawing we'll do for the rest of the trimester. Contour line drawing is the basis for almost every two-dimensional piece of artwork using paper, pencil, pen, watercolor. So we'll continue to do contour line. But sometimes when you do contour line drawing, and we saw this when we did our objects, or even when you were drawing your animal project, just contour line alone can limit your perception of the object that you're drawing. So it can be hard to understand what's in front or what's underneath through just utilization of line. So artists utilize shading or adding value to a drawing to create a three-dimensional illusion on a flat surface. So the example on the screen right now is a still life drawing from a Drawing 1 class done using a graphite drawing pencil. And part of what we'll learn as we work with these pencils is that in order to learn how to draw with a pencil, to learn how to draw with graphite, we do have to learn how to use a pencil the correct way. And those value changes then have to do with pencil pressure and layering, but never smudging with your finger. Okay? The reason for that is a couple of reasons for that. Reason one, graphite is a really tiny particle, okay, very, very tiny. And when you use graphite and rub it into your paper with your finger, what happens is the oil and dirt on your finger mixes with the graphite on your paper and essentially makes graphite mud, okay? If you have done a lot of smudging with your finger on pencil drawings and have them in a sketchbook or on a piece of paper and you go back to look at them later, very often they will turn brown or yellow. And that is because the oils from your skin have basically aged and the mud is getting old on your paper. So you'll also find that if you smudge pencil, you don't get as clean of a range of value. So you can't get to 10 or 12 distinct different values when you are smudging a pencil rather than layering and utilizing pressure to create value with a pencil. So in order to talk about value, we do have to talk about light, because light is where we get the value and where we get the shadows from. So when we're talking about light, a lot of times in art we'll talk about something called light logic. Light logic is the very regular pattern of the way light falls on objects and creates a series of patterns or shadow patterns that we can kind of predict. So this creates for us a little bit of some new vocabulary where we have the highlight, the cast shadow, and the crust shadow. So the highlight on any object is the brightest light area, and this can be in one spot or multiple spots depending on like the overall form, but it's where the light is hitting the object directly. All right, it will be the lightest area on your drawing. The next portion of the light logic is called the cast shadow, and the cast shadow is the darkest shadow that's cast on the surface under or behind the object. So if you stand outside on a super sunny day, the sun causes you to cast a shadow on the ground, right? So it's that shadow that's on the ground and under an object, or sometimes those shadows go up a wall. That is the cast shadow. It's the shadow under, the shadow of the object itself. The next section of shadow are the crust shadows, and these are typically multiple. And it's these are the shadows that we talk about on the object itself. Okay, so thinking about the shadows and the value that's on the object itself is the crust shadow. So if we look at an object like this sphere on the screen that's been shaded in using graphite to show those objects, we can see the highlight area where the light is coming from, and that gives us a clue as to where the light source is coming from. So you can see in this instance the light source is in the upper right-hand corner of the screen to give us that white highlight area at the top of that sphere. You can then see the cast shadow, which is the shadow that's underneath the sphere. You'll also notice that that cast shadow is darkest under the sphere, and typically they'll gradually lighten as they move away from the object. Cast shadows will be darker the brighter the light is and the closer the light source is. So those cast shadows can change in intensity just depending on the object and the light source itself. You'll then see the shadows on the sphere itself. So we have the deepest part of the crest shadow that's on the side of the sphere that's closest to the cast shadow, and then we have a range of mid-tones that curve up and around the sphere. You'll notice as you look at the sphere that the shapes of the shadows on the sphere match the shape of the sphere itself. In art, we very often say that the shadow finds the form, or the shadow and the form will match in terms of their shape. It's not possible for me to have a different shaped shadow than what my object is shaped like. So this curve at the bottom of the sphere will always match those curved shadows on the object itself. You'll also notice if you have an object that's on a light colored or shiny surface that we get a little tiny bit of reflected light. All right, that doesn't always happen. If you have an object on a dark surface or the surfaces aren't shiny or reflective in any way, a lot of times the crest shadow and the cast shadow will kind of blend together, and you won't see much difference between the shadowed portion of your object and the shadow in the background. But this gives you some idea of what a simple or basic object looks like, and those vocabulary words kind of in juxtaposition to that object. These are examples, and these have been done in a computer, so the shadow ranges are a little harsher. So you'll notice the sphere in the upper left-hand corner has kind of more of a band of dark and less of a range of gray, which is what we would expect to see in a drawing, as more of a range of gray. But this shows us the different way that different shapes and different forms kind of show those shadow shapes. So you'll notice that the curved shapes, like the sphere, the cylinder, and the cone, all have very gradually changing shadow shapes, They don't have sudden starts and stops. And like I said, the image on the screen right now does have a little bit artificially hard light, just because of the way that these images were constructed inside of a computer. But you'll notice as well that the cubes, anything that is a box, has individual sides that are completely different values from each other. So we have the light that hits one side of the cube, and then we have the secondary light plane, and then the shadowed side of the cube, and the cast shadow. So you can see that curved forms and rectilinear forms have very different ways that the shadow falls on those objects. And that has to do with the fact that light doesn't bend around corners, but it will kind of fall around a curve. These basic forms are the basic forms that all objects tend to be made of. So getting used to the idea that your arm is just a series of cylinders, that your nose on your face is a cone and two spheres, and imagining what basic shape an object is most close to can give you a hint as to how to shape that object, even if it's something you're shading from your imagination. So here's a pencil version. So this is done in graphite by a student in drawing 1. And it is that's a series of basic shapes or geometric forms, and you can see the different effect that actual graphite on a sheet of paper has from the image we just looked at. We can also look at the individual forms. So these are photographs of forms and a hard light situation. So you can see again that we have this varying tone on the round or curved objects. The shadows change very gradually, and we have the sharp edged objects where the shadow sides have each their own individual side. So it's good for us to understand that in terms of making a drawing. All right, so hopefully that gives you an introduction to value and how we use value and some of the vocabulary words that we need to create a value drawing using pencil. We will work in graphite for most of the rest of this trimester. So getting used to our graphite pencils will be the next step in this process.